What's up guys, Asian here again with another PTS video, and today we're going to be taking a second look at the two-handed versus dual wields, that DPS gap as of the Wrathstone PTS. So my previous video looking at the two-handed versus dual wield gap was taking a look on the stamina Nightblade, and that parse is still legitimate just because we do stamina Nightblades are one of the most popular stamina DPS classes in PvE right now, mainly because of the amount of DPS they're able to pull. So it is a nice comparison to kind of be able to see how the quote-unquote meta stamina DPS class is kind of shaping up when you have a two-hander versus a dual wield. But two-hander DPS on a stamina Nightblade isn't really telling the whole story, because stamina Nightblades do have a class spammable, and they also have a built-in class execute. So that's not exactly what I would say a complete comparison, and I apologize for that. I should have included this on the original video that I made here. So now we're going to be taking a look at the two-handed versus dual wield on a stamina sorcerer. So the stamsorc, as you guys might already know, they do not have a class spammable and they do not have a class execute. So this basically allows us to take a look at how the two-hander versus dual wield DPS performs when you're able to use the two-hander spammable executioner, which is basically an execute for a class that doesn't have a class execute. So for this particular test, now I know some people have been saying, well, you should be using uppercuts, or one of the morphs of uppercut I should say, you should be using Wrecking Blow as your spammable, but there's a little bit of a nuance there. So Wrecking Blow does have a cast time associated with it, so it has a 1 second cast time. So if you think about it, your Wrecking Blow is really taking 2 global cooldowns versus the 1 global cooldown. So it's not actually doing all that much damage. So if you divide that 14,797 by 2, that's actually how much damage you're doing per second, because you have that 1 second cast time. Compared to Executioner, yes, it does less damage. It only does roughly 5,000 damage, but it's a little bit cheaper to use. It's instant, so you're able to get 2 of them off in the same span of time you would have that Wrecking Blow. Wrecking Blow does have that Empower associated with it, but one of the main reasons why we don't actually use Wrecking Blow as a spammable is we don't really have the bar space for it. Take a look at the bar space that we currently have right now. We already have 4 abilities that we need to use on our back bar as a Stamsorc, assuming that you're going with a static rotation. If you're going more dynamic, then realistically you only have 3, but if you do have that Storm Atronach up, that ultimate up, you have 5 cooldowns that you have to manage. And if you're using Advancing Yokeda, yeah, it's already really pushing the ability to basically maintain your Advancing Yokeda stacks on your back bar. So having Wrecking Blow here basically means we'd have to change Rearming Trap or Dark Deal to the back bar here, and then we're losing Dark Armaments on the back bar. So just in terms of bar space, if you want to use Wrecking Blow as a spammable and then swap the Executioner as your spammable at once you hit 50% health, you basically need 3 open spots on your front bar here, and there's pretty much no instances where no classes I can think of at least, where you have 3 open spots without sacrificing something. So in this instance, we might have to sacrifice Dark Deal, or we'd have to sacrifice Bound Armaments on the back bar, or we'd have to sacrifice Advanced Yokeda uptime, all of which are generally going to give us better return than using Wrecking Blow as a spammable and then swapping to Executioner. So for all of our tests, we did just use Executioner as our main spammable for those reasons there. Other than that, we pretty much decided to go with your typical meta build. So we just have 2-piece Veldreths, 5-piece Reliquin, and then we have Advanced Yokeda. We did use a Greatsword just because a Greatsword is going to give us, at the very least, most consistent results. Also, they did get a buff, so now they have 6% additional damage done overall. So you could use a Great Axe, that's the other PvE option there, but the bleed with the Great Axe does ignore resistances, so we would get a slightly inflated parse, so I decided to go with the Great Sword instead. And we are comparing this to the meta setup, so our dual wield setup did use double daggers here. With Nern infused, the poison enchant is on the infused dagger here, and then for our Greatsword, we have infused with the poison damage enchant here. We are in a Wood Elf here. You can do this on any other stamina DPS races, but I said just to do it on the Wood Elf just to make sure that I was able to fully sustain a rotation no matter what scenario happened. So let's go ahead and swap over now to our results so we can go ahead and take a look at what we managed to pull here. So here are the results. Dual wield is on the left hand side, two-handed is on the right hand side. Now I do want to mention here that these are self-buffed parses, so whatever difference you see here, that gap is going to increase a little bit once you include raid buffs like Major Fracture, Minor Berserk, Minor Vulnerability, things like that. That just increases the DPS gap a little bit more here. So for our dual wield, we managed to pull 42.2k DPS on average, and then for our two-handed, we pulled about 41.6k DPS for a grand total of about 1.5% difference. So that's actually pretty small. It's smaller than it has been in the past. And this mainly comes down to the nerf to enchants on your one-handed weapon. So when you're dual wielding now, your enchants now have half the potency. So your poison damage enchant does half as much damage as it currently does on live. Your absorb stamina enchant does half the damage and restores half as much stamina as it does on live right now. So that combined with the slight buff to greatswords, now doing 6% additional damage done versus 5% damage done, that has pushed two-hander. That DPS gap has shrunk a considerable margin considering from where we have used to be. So a 1.5% DPS gap difference is actually, ultimately, it's actually not that big. Right now, if you take a look at the absolute difference, we're taking a look at 600 DPS. When you include raid buffs, that'll probably grow to be maybe 2k to 3k DPS difference. So really, dual wield is still pulling out ahead. That is definitely not a surprise here, just because the additional advantages that dual wield has over two-hander. I already covered this in the previous two-hand versus dual wield video. You guys can go ahead and check that out for a more complete description. But because of the advantages that dual wields have over two-hander, mainly with the passives, the additional enchant, the additional weapon damage, dual wield is still pulling out ahead. However, if you do want to do a two-hander DPS, then by all means you can certainly do so. With the two-hander DPS setup that I have, I'm running Carve with the additional minor heroism, so I am getting my ultimate up a little bit faster. On a 6 million dummy parts, you don't really see that much of a difference there, but on a longer fight, you will probably end up seeing a few more ballistas, a few more storm atronachs if you are running two-hander versus dual wields, just because you have that additional ulti gen from minor heroism. So overall, I would say if you are running a two-handed DPS, you can still pull vet trial level DPS. In fact, this level of DPS is perfectly fine for things like VMAW hard mode, VHOF hard mode. Obviously, I wouldn't necessarily bring stem DPS into any of the mini trials, but if you wanted to, then this is, you know, that you are capable of pulling the DPS required to do those trials there. It's just going to take you a little bit longer to kind of get used to things. You will have a little bit more sustain issues because you basically have to choose between a poison damage enchant or an absorb stamina enchant. So there are a few drawbacks for running a two-handed build, but overall it is looking like the gap between dual wield and two-hand has shrunk by a noticeable margin in this patch. So that is it for this PTS video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. I am going to be waiting. I will probably not be doing any more tests until the Monday patch notes are released for the PTS. That is going to come with some racial balance changes, as well as a kind of difference in how they're calculating CP and any other sort of balance changes they might be making to either sets or abilities or things like that. So I will not be doing any testing until after I see those patch notes released. At that point, I will probably redo the racial comparison test, just so we can get an idea of the rate where the different races stand compared to each other, as well as any other theory crafting stuff that might result from that. The only other thing that I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be exploring Sogvin's, I forget the things, Sogvin's for bow builds, just because that does seem like a pretty consistent way of getting minor force and a good alternative for advancing Yokeda on a bow build. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.